Chapter 1. The Time Traveller. The Time Traveller, it will be convenient to call him this, was talking to us about geometry. His grey eyes shone and his usually pale face was red and excited. The fire burned brightly, and there was that relaxed after-dinner feeling when thoughts run freely. You must listen carefully. I shall have to destroy one or two ideas that almost everyone accepts. For example, the geometry that they taught you at school. You know, of course, that a mathematical line, a line with no thickness, doesn't really exist. They taught you that? A mathematical model which only has length, width, and thickness doesn't really exist either. It's just an idea. That's all right, said the psychologist. But if you make that model out of a material, said Philby, a red-haired man who liked an argument, it exists. All things exist. Most people think so. But wait a moment. Imagine a thing that doesn't last for any time. Can it have a real existence? Philby looked thoughtful. Clearly, the time traveller said, a real body must have length, width, thickness, the dimensions of space, and also exist in time. But, through a natural human weakness, we usually forget the fourth of these. That, said a very young man, is very clear. Well, I don't mind telling you that I have been at work on this geometry of 4 dimensions for some time. Some of my results are interesting. Here is a record of the weather. This line shows the changes in temperature. Yesterday it was quite high, last night it fell, then this morning it rose again. Surely that line is not in any of the dimensions of space that we generally understand. It is along the time dimension. But, said the medical man, looking hard at the fire, if time is really only a 4th dimension of space, why can't we move about in it as we move in the other dimensions? The time traveller smiled. Are you so sure we can move freely in space? We can go right and left, backwards and forwards freely enough, but up and down, that isn't so easy. Well, we can move a little up and down, said the medical man, but we can't move at all in time. We are always in the present moment. That is at the centre of my great discovery. Why can a modern man not hope that one day he might travel in time? It doesn't make sense, said Philby. Possibly not, said the time traveller. But now you begin to see the reason for my work on the geometry of 4 dimensions. Long ago, I had an idea for a machine that can travel in any direction of space and time, as the driver wants. Philby started to laugh. But I have proved this by experiment, said the time traveller. It would be very useful for the historian, the psychologist suggested. He could travel back and see how things really happened. Then there is the future, said the very young man. Just think. You could put all your money in the bank, leave it to grow and hurry on ahead. To discover a society, I said. That doesn't use money. Of all the crazy ideas, began the psychologist. It seemed so to me, and I never talked about it until... An experiment, I cried. You are going to prove that? Let's see what you can do, said the psychologist, though I think it's all rubbish. The time traveller smiled at us. Then, with his hands deep inside his trouser pockets, He walked slowly out of the room and we heard him going down to the laboratory. The psychologist looked at us. I wonder what he's got. A trick, probably, said the medical man, and Philby tried to tell us about a trick he had seen once, but before he had really started his story, the time traveller came back. He held something in his hand. It was made of shiny metal and was not much larger than a small clock. And now I must be exact, because unless you believe his explanation, it is impossible to explain what happened next. He took one of the small tables in the room and put it in front of the fire. On this, he placed the machine. Then he placed a chair next to it and sat down. The only other object on the table was a small lamp, the light of which fell on the model. I sat in a low chair nearest the fire, and I pulled this forward so I was almost between the time traveller and the fire. Philby sat behind him, looking over his shoulder. The medical man watched him from the right, the psychologist from the left. The very young man stood behind the psychologist. We were all wide awake. I cannot believe that a trick was played on us under these conditions. This little thing, said the time traveller, resting his elbows on the table and pressing his hands together above the machine, is only a model. It is my plan for a machine to travel through time. You will notice that it looks a little rough, and this bar has an odd shining appearance. It looks quite unreal. He pointed to this part with his finger. Also, here is one little white lever, and here is another. The medical man got out of his chair and looked closely into the thing. It's beautifully made, he said. It took 2 years to make, said the time traveller. Then, when we had all had a close look, he said, Now I want you to understand clearly that this lever sends the machine flying into the future, and this other one sends it into the past. Soon, I'm going to press the lever, and the machine will disappear into future time. Have a good look at the thing. Look at the table too, and satisfy yourself that there can be no tricks. I don't want to waste this model and then be told I'm dishonest. There was a minute's pause, perhaps. The psychologist opened his mouth to speak to me but closed it again. Then the time traveller put out his finger towards the lever. No, he said suddenly, pulling his finger away again. Lend me your hand. And turning to the psychologist, he took that person's hand in his own and told him to put out his first finger and touch the lever. So the psychologist himself sent the model time machine on its endless journey. We all saw the lever turn. I am completely certain there was no trick. There was a breath of wind and the lamp flame jumped. The machine suddenly turned round, looked unclear, was seen like a ghost for a second and was gone, disappeared. Except for the lamp, the table was empty. Everyone was silent for a minute. Then the psychologist recovered from his surprise and looked under the table. The time traveller laughed cheerfully. Well, he said. We all stared. My friend, said the medical man quietly, are you serious about this? Do you really believe that machine has travelled in time? Certainly, said the time traveller, and I have a big machine nearly finished in there. He pointed to the laboratory. And when that is put together, I intend to go on a journey myself. You mean to say that that machine has travelled into the future, said Philby. into the future or the past. I'm not completely sure which. After some time, the psychologist said, "It has gone into the past, if it has gone anywhere." "Why?" said the time traveller. "Because I'm quite sure that it hasn't moved in space, and if it travelled into the future, it would still be here all this time. It would have to travel through the time that is passing as we stand here." "But," I said, "if it travelled into the past, why wasn't it here when we first came into this room, and last Thursday when we were here, and the Thursday before that? Let's be fair. These are serious questions," said Philby, turning towards the time traveller. "That can be explained," the time traveller said to the psychologist. "It's there but can't be seen." "Of course," said the psychologist. "That's simple enough. Why didn't I think of it? We can't see it, in the same way that we can't see a bullet flying through the air. If it is travelling through time 50 times or 100 times faster than we are, we can see only 1/50th or 1/100th of it." We sat and stared at the empty table for a minute or two. Then the time traveller asked us what we thought of it all. "It sounds believable enough tonight," said the medical man, "but it will seem different in the morning." "Would you like to see the time machine itself?" asked the time traveller, and then, taking the lamp in his hand, he led the way to the laboratory. I remember clearly how we all followed him, and how, in the laboratory, we saw a larger copy of the little machine. It was almost complete, but 2 bars lay unfinished on the table, and I picked one up for a better look. "Now listen," said the medical man. "Are you really serious?" "In that machine," said the time traveller, holding the lamp high, "I intend to travel in time. Is that clear? I was never more serious in my life." None of us knew what to say. I looked at Philby over the shoulder of the medical man, and he smiled at me. Chapter 2. The Traveller Returns. I think at that time none of us really believed in the time machine. The fact is, the time traveller was one of those men who are too clever to be believed. You never felt that you knew everything about him. You always thought that something was hidden, that he was playing a trick on you. If Philby showed us the model and explained things in the time traveller's words, we would believe him more easily. We would understand his reasons, because anyone could understand Philby. But the time traveller had a strong imagination, and we didn't really believe him. The next Thursday I went to Richmond again, and, arriving late, found 4 or 5 men already in the sitting room. The medical man was standing in front of the fire with a sheet of paper in one hand and his watch in the other. I looked around for the time traveller. "It's 7:30 now," said the medical man. "I suppose we'd better have dinner." "Where's our host?" I asked. "You have just come? It's rather odd. He has been delayed. He asks me in this note to start dinner at 7 if he's not back. He says he will explain when he comes." "It seems a pity to let the dinner spoil," said the editor of a well-known daily paper. And so the medical man rang the bell. Only the psychologist, the medical man and myself had attended the first dinner. The other men were the editor, a journalist, and another, a quiet, shy man with a beard, who I didn't know. There was some discussion at the dinner table about the time traveller's absence, and I suggested time travelling, in a half-joking way. The editor wanted that to be explained to him, And the psychologist gave a very dull description of the clever trick we had seen a week before. He was in the middle of this when the door opened slowly and without noise. I was facing it and saw him first. "Well," I said, "at last." The door opened wider and the time traveller stood in front of us. I gave a cry of surprise. "Oh, my friend! What's the matter?" cried the medical man who saw him next. The others turned towards the door. He looked very strange. His coat was dusty and dirty, his hair untidy and, it seemed to me, greyer, either with dust or because its colour had gone. His face was very pale and his chin had a cut on it. For a moment he stopped at the door. The light seemed too strong for his eyes. Then he came into the room. He walked slowly, with a bad limp. He did not say a word, but came painfully to the table and moved a hand towards the wine. The editor filled a glass and pushed it towards him. He drank it, and it seemed to do him good, because he looked round the table and smiled a little. "What have you been doing?" said the medical man. The time traveller did not seem to hear. "Don't let me worry you," he said in a tired voice. "I'm all right." He stopped, held out his glass for more, and drank it down. "That's good," he said. His eyes grew brighter, and a faint colour came to his face. Then he spoke again. "I'm going to wash and dress, and then I'll come down and explain things. Save me some of that meat. I'm hungry." The editor began a question. "I'll tell you soon," said the time traveller. "I'm feeling strange. I'll be all right in a minute." He put down his glass and walked towards the door to the stairs. Standing up in my place, I saw his feet as he went out. He had nothing on them except a pair of socks with holes in them. They were covered with dried blood. Then the door closed behind him. For a minute, perhaps, my mind was empty. "Strange behaviour of a famous scientist," I heard the editor say, thinking of his newspaper. "What's happened to him?" said the journalist. "I don't understand." I thought of the time traveller walking painfully upstairs. I don't think anyone else had noticed his limp. The medical man recovered from his surprise first and rang the bell for a hot plate. The editor picked up his knife and fork, and the silent man did the same. The dinner started again. Conversation was slow for a minute or two because we were so surprised. Then the editor said, "Does our friend have another job or just a strong imagination?" "I feel sure it's this business of the time machine," I said, and continued the psychologist's story of our earlier meeting. The new guests were very surprised, and the editor said, "What is this time travelling? A man couldn't cover himself with dust by doing something impossible, could he?" The journalist too refused to believe it, and started to make a joke of the whole thing. "Our special reporter in the Day After Tomorrow reports," he was saying, or shouting, when the time traveller came back. He was dressed in ordinary evening clothes, and nothing except his tired look reminded me of the change that had shocked me. "Well," said the editor, laughing, "these men say you have been travelling into the middle of next week." The time traveller sat down without a word. He smiled quietly in his usual way. "Where's my meat?" he said. "How nice it is to stick a fork into meat again." "Story," cried the editor. "Later," said the time traveller. "I want something to eat first." I won't say a word until I get some food into my stomach. Thanks. And the salt. One word, I said. Have you been time traveling? Yes, said the time traveler with his mouth full. I'd give £1 a line for the story in your own words, said the editor. The time traveler pushed his glass towards the silent man who was staring at his face. He jumped a little, then poured him some wine. The rest of the dinner was uncomfortable. The journalist tried to relax us by telling funny stories. The medical man smoked a cigarette and watched the time traveler closely. The silent man seemed nervous and drank a lot of wine. At last the time traveler pushed his plate away and looked round at us. I suppose I must apologize, he said. I was so hungry. I've had a most interesting time. He put out his hand for a cigarette. But come into the smoking room. The story is too long to tell over dirty plates. And he led the way. You have told these men about the machine, he said to me, sitting back in his chair and naming the 3 new guests. But the thing's just a trick, said the editor. I can't argue tonight. I don't mind telling the story, but I can't argue. I will, he continued, tell you the story of what has happened to me, if you like. But you mustn't interrupt. Most of it will sound like lies, but it is true, every word of it. I was in the laboratory earlier, and since then, I have lived 8 days. Days like no human being ever lived before. I am very tired, but I shan't sleep until I have told this thing to you. But no interruptions. Is it agreed? We all agreed, and the time traveller began his story as I have written it down. He sat back in his chair at first and spoke slowly. Afterwards he got more excited. As I write it down, I feel the limits of pen and ink, and my own limits. You will read, I expect, with enough attention, but you cannot see the speaker's white, honest face in the bright circle of the little lamp, or hear his voice. Most of us listeners were in shadow. At first, each looked at the others. After a time, we stopped doing that and looked only at the time traveller's face. Chapter 3. Forwards in Time. I told some of you last Thursday how the time machine works and showed you the actual thing itself, incomplete in the laboratory. It is there now, a little damaged by travel, but not in bad condition. I expected to finish it on Friday, but when I had put most of it together, I found that one piece was too short. I had to make this again, and the thing wasn't complete until this morning. So at 10 o'clock today, the first of all time machines began its journey. I checked everything, then got into the seat. I felt a little frightened but interested in what was going to happen next. I took the starting lever in one hand and the stopping one in the other. Then I pressed the first and almost immediately the second. I felt that I was falling, but looking around, I saw the laboratory exactly as before. Had anything happened? For a moment I thought that my mind had tricked me. Then I noticed the clock. A moment before it had showed a minute or 2 past 10. Now it was nearly 3:30. I took a breath, held the starting lever with both hands, and pushed it harder. The laboratory became unclear and went dark. Mrs. Watchett, my cook, came in and walked, without seeing me, towards the garden door. I suppose it took her a minute or 2 to cross the room, but she seemed to move at high speed. I pressed the lever over to its furthest position. The night came, and in another moment came tomorrow. The laboratory grew faint and unclear. Tomorrow night became black, then day again, night again, day again, faster and faster. A low and changing sound filled my ears, and my mind became confused. As my speed increased, night followed day faster and faster. The faint picture of the laboratory seemed soon to move away from me. I saw the sun jumping quickly across the sky, once every minute, each minute being a day. I suppose that the laboratory had been destroyed and I had come into the open air. The quick changes of darkness and light were very painful to my eyes. Then, in the short dark times, I saw the moon turning quickly through her quarters from new to full. Soon as I continued still increasing speed, the change from night to day became one continuous greyness. The sky turned a wonderful deep blue. The jumping sun became a line of fire, the moon a fainter line that changed in width. The land was difficult to see clearly. I was still on the hillside where this house now stands. I saw trees growing and changing. They changed from green to brown and back to green again, grew tall, died and fell. I saw enormous buildings rise up, then disappear like dreams. The speed dials on the machine went round faster and faster. The line of the sun moved up and down from summer to winter in a minute or less. Minute by minute, white snow spread across the world and disappeared, and was followed by the green of spring. The unpleasant feelings at the beginning now changed into a kind of crazy excitement. I noticed a strange movement of the machine from side to side, which I couldn't explain, but my mind was too confused to pay any attention to it. So with a kind of madness growing in me, I threw myself into the future. At first, I didn't think of stopping. But then a new feeling grew in my mind, a sense of fear mixed with the need to know. What strange changes had happened to people? What wonderful improvements to our simple way of life might appear when I looked more closely into that world? I saw large and wonderful buildings growing in front of me, bigger than ours. I saw a stronger green colour move up the hillside and stay there without any interruption by snow. Although I was travelling so quickly, the world still seemed beautiful, and so my mind turned to stopping the machine. My greatest fear was that there would already be something in the space when I, or the machine, stopped. While I travelled at high speed through time, this didn't matter much. I seemed to move like a gas through other things. But when I stopped, I would put myself into whatever lay in my way. Such close contact with the other thing might cause a great explosion. I had thought of this possibility again and again while I was making the machine, but then I had cheerfully accepted it as one of the necessary dangers that a man must face. I wasn't as cheerful now when I couldn't escape it. The strangeness of everything, the movement of the machine, and the feeling of continual falling had made me very nervous. I told myself that I could never stop. Then, becoming suddenly angry, I decided to stop immediately. Like a fool in a hurry, I pulled over the lever. The machine turned over and I was thrown through the air. There was the sound of thunder in my ears. For a moment I forgot what was happening. Then I found myself sitting on soft grass in front of the machine. Heavy rain was falling. Everything still seemed grey. But soon I noticed that the confusion in my ears was gone. I looked around me. I was on a small lawn, surrounded by bushes. Their purple flowers were dropping under the beating of the heavy rain. In a moment I was wet to the skin. A fine welcome, I thought, to a man who has travelled so many years to see you. Soon I stood up and looked around me. Through the heavy rain I could see an enormous figure cut, perhaps, out of white stone, but the rest of the world was unclear. As the rain became lighter, I saw the white figure more clearly. It was very large. A tree touched its shoulder. It was shaped a little like a sphinx with spread wings and seemed to be flying. The pedestal seemed to be made of metal and had turned green with age. I stood looking at the figure for some time. When, at last, I took my eyes from it for a moment, I saw that the rain was stopping and the sky was growing lighter. Then I suddenly realized the full danger of my journey. What might appear when the rain stopped? What might people be like? Had they perhaps changed into something inhuman and very strong? I might seem like an old world wild animal, but more frightening because I looked like them, a horrible creature to be speedily killed. Already I saw the shapes of enormous buildings and a wooded hillside growing clearer through the dying storm. I turned quickly to the time machine and tried hard to turn it the right way up. As I did so, the grey rain suddenly stopped and the sun shone through the clouds. My fear grew stronger and I fought hard with the machine. It moved under my attack and turned over. It hit my chin violently. One hand on the seat, the other on the lever, I stood breathing heavily, ready to climb inside it again. But now I had a way of escaping. My confidence recovered. I looked with more interest and less fear at this world of the future. In a round opening, high up in the wall of the nearest building, I saw a group of figures wearing soft robes. They had seen me, and their faces were turned towards me. Then I heard voices coming nearer. Through the bushes I saw the heads and shoulders of running men. One of these appeared on a path leading straight to the lawn where I stood. He was quite thin, just over 1 meter high, wearing only a long purple shirt tied at the waist with a leather belt. Noticing that, I realized for the first time how warm the air was. He seemed to be very beautiful, but also very weak. At the sight of him, my confidence returned. I took my hands from the machine. Chapter 4. The People of the Future. In another moment we were standing face to face, I and this weak creature from the future. He came straight up to me and laughed into my eyes. I noticed immediately that he had no fear in him. Then he turned to the 2 others who were following him. He spoke to them in a strange and very sweet-sounding language. There were more coming, and soon a little group of perhaps 8 or 10 of these beautiful people were around me. One of them spoke to me. I don't know why, but I thought that my voice was too strong and deep for them, so I shook my head and, pointing to my ears, shook it again. He came a step forward, stopped, and then touched my hand. Then I felt other soft little hands on my back and shoulders. They wanted to make sure that I was real. There was nothing at all frightening in this. In fact, these pretty little people had a relaxed and childlike gentleness that made me confident. And also, they looked so weak that I could imagine myself throwing the whole group of them to the ground. But I made a sudden movement to warn them when I saw their little pink hands touching the time machine. Fortunately then, when it wasn't too late, I thought of the danger that I had forgotten. Reaching over the bars of the machine, I took out the little levers that would make it move. I put these in my pocket. Then I turned again to the little people to see how I could communicate. Looking closer at their faces, I saw some strange differences in their sweet prettiness. They all had the same wavy hair, and this came to a sharp end at the neck and below the ears. There was none growing on their faces, and their ears were very small. Their mouths were small too, with bright red, rather thin lips. Their little chins came to a point, and their eyes were large and gentle. Perhaps my sense of my own importance is too great, but I felt even then that they showed very little interest in me, because they didn't try to speak to me, but simply stood smiling and speaking softly to each other. I began the conversation. I pointed to the time machine and to myself. Then, after thinking for a moment how to describe time, I pointed to the sun. At once a pretty little figure dressed in purple and white did the same, and then made the sound of thunder. For a moment I was very surprised, though the meaning of his movement was clear enough. The question had come into my mind suddenly. Were these people fools? You couldn't really understand how I felt. I had always expected that people living about 800,000 years in the future would have much greater knowledge than us in science, art, everything. But one of them had asked me a very simple question which showed him to be on the level of intelligence of one of our 5-year-old children. He had asked me, in fact, if I had come from the sun in a thunderstorm. This made me think again about their clothes, their weak arms and legs and pretty faces. A feeling of sadness came into my mind. For a moment I felt that I had built the time machine for no reason at all. I said yes, pointed to the sun, and made a sound like thunder. This was so real that it frightened them. They all stood back a step or two and bent their heads down. Then one came laughing towards me, carrying some beautiful flowers which were new to me. He put these around my neck. The idea made them all happy. Soon they were running around for flowers and throwing them on me until I was almost covered with them. You cannot imagine what wonderful flowers countless years of work had produced. Then someone suggested that their new toy should be shown to others in the nearest building, and so I was led past the Sphinx made of white stone, which had seemed to watch me all the time with a smile at my surprise. As I went with them, the memory of my hopes for a future full of highly intelligent people came to my mind and made me smile. The building had a very large entrance and was really enormous. I was worried about the growing crowd of little people and the shadows beyond the big open doors. Around me I saw many bushes and flowers. It was clear that no gardener was looking after them, but they still looked beautiful. The time machine was left on the lawn. Several more brightly dressed people met me in the doorway and we walked through into a large hall. The roof was in shadow and the windows, partly made of coloured glass, let in a soft light. The floor was made of large pieces of a very hard white metal, lower in places where people had clearly walked across it for hundreds of years. Along the length of the room were many tables made of shiny stone, perhaps 1/2 metre above the floor, and on these were piles of fruit. Some I recognized as larger apples and oranges, but mostly they were strange. The people with me sat down around a table and made signs for me to do the same. They immediately began to eat the fruit with their hands. I was happy to follow their example because I felt thirsty and hungry. As I did so, I took some time to look around the hall and noticed that the glass windows were broken in many places and the curtains were thick with dust. The general effect, though, was very attractive. There were, perhaps, a couple of hundred people eating in the hall, and most of them were watching me with interest, their little eyes shining over the fruit they were eating. All of them were wearing the same soft but strong material. Fruit, I later learned, was all that they ate. These people of the future didn't eat meat, and while I was with them, although I missed it, I could only eat fruit too. In fact, I discovered later that horses, cows and sheep and dogs had disappeared from Earth. But the fruits were very pleasant. When I had filled my stomach, I tried to learn some of the language of these new people. The fruits seemed an easy thing to start with, and holding one of these up, I began using questioning sounds and movements. I had great difficulty making them understand. At first they stared in surprise and laughed, but soon a fair-haired little female seemed to realize what I wanted, and repeated a name. They had to talk for some time to explain things to each other, and when I first tried to make the sounds of their language, they were very amused. I felt like a teacher among children, but soon I at least knew a number of names for things, and even the verb to eat. It was slow work, though, and the little people soon got tired and wanted to get away from my questions, so I decided to let them give short lessons when they wanted to. And they were very short lessons because I have never met people who are lazier or more easily tired. They used to come to me with happy cries of surprise like children, but like children they soon stopped examining me and went away to find another toy. When the dinner ended, I noted the disappearance of almost all the creatures who had surrounded me at first. It is odd, too, how quickly I stopped caring about these little people. I was continually meeting more of them. They followed me a little distance, talked and laughed around me, smiled in a friendly way, then left me alone. Chapter 5. Life in the Future. The evening was calm as I came out of the great hall, and the land was lit by the colour of the sun as it went down. The big building was on the side of a wide river valley, but the Thames had moved a kilometre or two from its present position. I decided to climb to the top of a hill from where I could see more of our world in the year 802,701. That was the date the little dials of my machine had showed. As I walked, I looked for anything that could explain the bad condition of things. A little way up the hill, for example, was a great pile of stones held together by pieces of metal. These were the ruins of a great building, although I couldn't imagine what its use had been. Looking round with a sudden thought, I realized that there were no small houses. Here and there among the trees and bushes were palace-like buildings, but the single house, and possibly even the family, had disappeared. And then came another thought. I looked at the small group of figures who were following me. I saw that all had the same type of clothes, the same soft hairless faces, and the same girlish arms and legs. It may seem odd, perhaps, that I hadn't noticed this before, but everything was so strange. Now I saw the fact clearly enough. These people of the future were all very similar in clothes, and in all other ways the differences between men and women had almost disappeared, and the children seemed to my eyes to be just smaller adults. Seeing how safely and comfortably these people lived, I felt that this close similarity of the sexes was understandable. If there are enough people, it becomes a problem rather than an advantage to have a lot of children. If violence conies only rarely and children are safe, there is less need for men to be strong and protect their families. This, I must remind you, was my feeling at the time. Later, I discovered how wrong I was. I continued, and because I could walk better than the people of the future, I found myself alone for the first time. At the top of the hill, I found a seat of a yellow metal that I didn't recognize. I sat down on it and looked at the wide view of our world under the sunset of that long day. It was as beautiful as I have ever seen. The west was burning gold, mixed with some purple and red. Below was the valley of the Thames, in which the river lay like a line of shining metal. As I watched, I began to try to understand the things I had seen. Afterwards, I realized I had only learned half the truth. It seemed to me that people were now past their best. The sunset made me think about the sunset of our people. For the first time, I began to understand an odd result of the social changes we are trying to make at the moment. Strength comes because we need to be strong. Weakness comes when we feel safe. The work of improving the conditions of life, of making life safer and safer, had continued until nothing more could be done. The result was what I saw. The science of our time has attacked only a few human diseases, but it moves forwards. Farming today is still at an early stage. We improve our plants and animals very slowly. A new and better apple, a prettier and larger flower, a cow that gives more milk. One day, the whole world will be better organized. And better. I knew that this change had been made, and made well, in the space of time across which my machine had jumped. The air was free of unpleasant insects. The earth was free of useless plants. Everywhere there were fruits, and sweet and pleasant flowers. Beautiful birds flew here and there, and I saw no diseases during my stay. Social changes, too, had been made. I saw people living in fine buildings, beautifully dressed, but I hadn't yet found them doing any work. There were no signs of economic activity. The shop, the advertisement, buying and selling, all of these things are so important to us, and all of them were gone. It was natural in the evening that I had the idea of a social heaven. But this change in conditions has to produce changes in people. What is the cause of human intelligence and energy? Difficulties make people strong and clever and help them to work together. And the family, with its protective love and selfishness, is there for the care of children. The love of parents helps to keep the young out of danger. Now, where were these dangers? I thought of the physical smallness of the people, their low intelligence and those big ruined buildings. It strengthened my belief that humans, who had always fought against nature, had finally won. Because after the fight comes quietness. People had been strong, energetic, and intelligent, and had used this energy to change their living conditions. And now they too had changed because of the new conditions. No doubt the beauty of the buildings was the result of the last waves of the now purposeless energy of people. After that, they began to lead quieter lives. Even artistic activity would finally disappear, had almost disappeared in the time I saw. The people liked to cover themselves in flowers, to dance and to sing in the sunlight. That was all they did. As I stood there in the growing dark, I thought that I had understood the whole secret of these pleasant people. Possibly their population control had worked too well, and their numbers had fallen instead of staying the same. That would explain the empty ruins. My explanation was very simple and believable enough, as most wrong ideas are. Chapter 6: Lost in Time. As I stood there thinking about this too perfect success of humans, the full moon came up in the northeast. The little figures stopped moving around below me, and the night began to feel cold. I decided to go down and find a place to sleep. I looked for the building I knew. Then my eye moved to the white sphinx on the pedestal. There were the bushes and there was the little lawn. I looked at it again. A strange doubt made me feel cold. No, I said to myself, that isn't the lawn. But it was the lawn because the white face of the Sphinx was towards it. Can you imagine how I felt as I realized this? But you can't. The time machine had gone. At once I understood the possibility of losing my own time, of being left helpless in this strange new world. I ran with great jumps down the hillside. Once I fell and cut my face. I did nothing to stop the blood, but jumped up and continued running. All the time I was saying to myself, they have just pushed it under the bushes out of the way. But I knew that I was wrong. I suppose I covered the whole distance to the small lawn, 3 kilometers perhaps, in 10 minutes. I shouted, but nobody answered. Nobody seemed to be moving in that moonlit world. When I reached the lawn, I found that my worst fears were true. The time machine was nowhere to be seen. I felt faint and cold. I ran round the lawn quickly, checking every corner, then stopped suddenly. Above me was the white sphinx. It seemed to smile with pleasure at my problems. It is possible that the little people had put the machine in a safe place for me, but I didn't feel that they were either strong enough or caring enough to move it. This is what worried me, the feeling of a new power that had moved the machine. But where could it be? I think I went a little mad. I remember running violently in and out of the moonlit bushes all around the Sphinx and frightening a small white animal that I didn't recognize. Then, crying and shouting, I went down to the great building of stone. The big hall was dark, silent, and empty. I lit a match and continued past the dusty curtains. There I found a second great hall where about 20 of the little people were sleeping. I have no doubt they found my second appearance strange, as I came suddenly out of the quiet darkness with mad noises and the sudden light of a match. Perhaps they had forgotten about matches. "Where is my time machine?" I began, shaking them with my hands. This behavior was very strange to them. Some laughed, but most looked very frightened. When I saw them standing round me, I realized that it was foolish to try and frighten them. Judging by their daylight behavior, I thought that fear must be forgotten. I threw down the match and, knocking one of the people over as I went, I ran across the big dining hall again, out under the moonlight. I heard cries of terror and their little feet running this way and that. I don't remember everything I did as the moon moved slowly up the sky. I know that I ran here and there screaming, then lay on the ground near the Sphinx and cried. After that I slept, and when I woke up again, it was light. I sat up in the freshness of the morning, trying to remember how I had got there. Then things became clear in my mind. I understood the wild stupidity of my madness overnight, and I could reason with myself. Suppose the worst, I said. Suppose the machine is really lost, perhaps destroyed. I should be calm and patient, learn the ways of the people, learn what has happened and how to get materials and tools. Then, in the end, perhaps I can make another machine. That would be my only hope, perhaps, but better than giving up. And it was a beautiful and interesting world. But probably the machine had only been taken away. I must be calm, find its hiding place, and get it back by force and cleverness. I stood up and looked around me, wondering where I could wash. I felt tired and dirty and rather surprised by my emotional state the night before. I made a careful examination of the ground around the little lawn. I wasted some time in useless questions asked, as well as I could, to the little people that passed. They all failed to understand what I meant. Some simply said nothing. Others thought it was a joke and laughed at me. The grass told me more. I found a line in it. There were other signs around with strange, narrow footprints. This made me look again at the pedestal. It was made, as I think I have said, of metal. It was highly decorated with metal panels on either side. I went and knocked at these. The pedestal was hollow. There was no way to pull to open the panels, but perhaps if they were doors, they opened from inside. One thing was clear enough to my mind. It wasn't difficult to work out that the time machine was inside that pedestal. But how had it got there? I saw the heads of two people dressed in orange coming through the bushes towards me. They came and, pointing to the pedestal, I tried to make them understand my wish to open it. But at my first move to do this, they behaved very oddly. I don't know how to describe their faces to you. They looked insulted. I tried a sweet-looking man in white next, with exactly the same result. He made me feel ashamed of myself. But as you know, I wanted the time machine, and I tried him again. As he turned away like the others, I lost my temper. In 3 steps I was after him, took him by the loose part of his robe round the neck, and began pulling him towards the pedestal. Then I saw the fear on his face and I let him go. But I wasn't beaten yet. I hit the metal panels with my hands. I thought I heard something move inside. To be exact, I thought I heard a sound like a laugh. But perhaps I was mistaken. Then I got a big stone from the river and hit the metal until I had flattened part of the decoration. The little people could hear the noise a kilometre away in all directions, but they did nothing. I saw a crowd of them on the hillside, looking at me in a frightened way. At last, hot and tired, I sat down to watch the place. But I was too impatient to watch for long. I could work at a problem for years, but I was unable to wait, inactive, for 24 hours. I got up after a time and began walking aimlessly through the bushes towards the hill again. Patience, I said to myself. If you want your machine again, you must leave that pedestal alone. If they intend to take your machine away, it won't help if you destroy their metal panels. If they don't, you will get it back when you can ask for it. Face this world. Learn its ways. Watch it. Be careful of guessing its meaning too quickly. In the end, you will find an answer to it all. Then suddenly the humor of the situation came into my mind. The thought of the years I had spent in study and work to get into the future age, and now my impatience to get out of it. I had put myself into the most hopeless situation a man could ever imagine. I couldn't help laughing at myself. Chapter 7. Ghosts. Going through the big palace, it seemed to me that the little people were staying away from me. Perhaps it was my imagination, or because I had hit the metal panels. I was careful, though, to show no worry and not try to catch any of them, and after a day or two the situation got back to normal. I decided to put any thought of my time machine and the mystery of the metal doors as much as possible in a corner of my memory. I hoped that in the end, growing knowledge would lead me back to them in a natural way. But you can understand why I stayed within a circle of a few kilometers around my point of arrival. As far as I could see, all the world seemed to be like the Thames Valley. From every hill I saw the same large numbers of fine buildings, all very different in material and style, and the same kinds of trees and bushes. I soon noticed, though, a number of wells in the ground. Several of these, it seemed to me, were very deep. One lay by a path up the hill, which I had followed during my first walk. Like the others, it had a top made of metal, interestingly decorated and protected by a little roof from the rain. Sitting by the side of these wells and looking down into the darkness, I could see no sign of water or any reflection when I lit a match. But in all of them, I heard a certain sound like the beating of a big engine. I also discovered from the flames of my matches that air was going down into them. I threw a piece of paper down into one and, instead of falling slowly, it was at once pulled quickly out of sight. I couldn't imagine what these wells were for, and I must say now that I learned very little about many parts of the life of these people. Let me describe my difficulties. I went into several big palaces, but they were just living places, great dining halls and sleeping apartments. I could find no machines of any kind, but these people were dressed in fine cloth that didn't seem very old, and their shoes, though undecorated, were very well made. But the people didn't seem to make things themselves. There were no shops, no factories, no signs that they brought things in from other places. They spent all their time playing gently, swimming in the river, falling in love in a half-playful way, eating fruit and sleeping. I couldn't see how or where things were produced. But something had taken the time machine into the pedestal. Why? I couldn't imagine. Suppose you found something written in English with here and there some words that were completely unknown to you. Well, on the third day of my visit, that was how I felt about the world of 802,701. That day I made a friend, a kind of friend. As I was watching some of the little people playing in a shallow part of the river, one of them was suddenly pulled away by the water. The river there could run quite quickly, but not too quickly for a swimmer of normal ability. It will give you an idea, therefore, of the weakness of these people when I tell you that none tried to help the one that was in such danger. When I realized this, I quickly took off my clothes and, walking into the water at a place lower down, I caught her and brought her safely to land. She soon began to feel better, and I saw that she was all right before I left her. I had such a low opinion of her people by then that I didn't expect any thanks from her. I was wrong about that, though. This happened in the morning. In the afternoon, I met my little woman as I was returning from a long walk, and she greeted me with cries of happiness and gave me some flowers. Perhaps because I had been very lonely, I did my best to show I was happy with the gift. We were soon sitting together and deep in a conversation, mainly of smiles. The woman's friendliness affected me exactly as a child's would. We passed each other flowers and she kissed my hands. I did the same to hers. Then I tried to talk and found that her name was Weena. That was the beginning of a strange friendship, which continued for a week and ended. As I will tell you, she was exactly like a child. She wanted to be with me always. She wanted to follow me everywhere, and on my next journey around the area, I walked fast and tried to leave her behind. She gave up at last, calling after me rather sadly. But the problems of the world had to be solved, and I hadn't, I said to myself, come into the future to start a relationship. She was, though, a very great comfort. When it was too late, only when it was too late, I clearly understood how badly she felt when I left her and what she meant to me. By seeming fond of me, and by showing in her weak way that she cared for me, the little person soon gave my returns to the place of the White Sphinx almost the feeling of coming home. I used to watch for her when I came over the hill. From her, too, I learned that fear had not yet left the world. She was fearless enough in the daylight, but she hated the dark shadows. Darkness to her was the one thing to be frightened of. It was a very strong emotion, and I started thinking and watching. I discovered then, among other things, that these people got together in the great houses after dark and slept in groups. I never found one outside, alone, and if I entered the room without a light, I made them very afraid. But I was such a fool that I missed the lesson of that fear, and although it made Weena unhappy, I slept away from the others. It worried her greatly, but in the end, her feelings for me won. For 5 of the nights of our friendship, including the last night of all, she slept with her head on my arm. But my story is running away from me as I speak of her. On the night before I met her, I was woken very early in the morning. I had slept badly, dreaming that I was underwater and that fish were touching my face. I woke suddenly and with the odd feeling that a greyish animal had just rushed out of the room. I tried to go to sleep again, but I felt uncomfortable. It was that grey hour when things are just appearing from the darkness, but are still unreal. I got up, went down into the great hall and out onto the stones in front of the palace. I thought I would go and watch the sun come up. The moon was going down, and the dying moonlight and the first light of day were mixed in a pale half-light. The bushes were inky black, the ground a dark grey, and up on the hillside I thought I could see ghosts. 3 times I saw white figures, and twice I thought I saw a single white animal running quickly on 2 legs. Near the ruins I saw a group of them carrying a dark body. They moved quickly, and it seemed that they disappeared among the bushes. The light was still unclear, you must understand. I was experiencing that cold, uncertain early morning feeling you may know, and I doubted my eyes. As the eastern sky grew brighter, and the light of day brought stronger colours to the world again, I watched the hillside closely, but I saw no more white figures. I thought about them all morning, or at least until I had to get Weena out of the river. I connected them in some way with the white animal I had touched in my first mad search for the time machine. It was more pleasant to think about Weena, but these ghosts would soon take much stronger control of my mind. Chapter 8. Morlocks. I think I said how much hotter the weather of this golden age was than our own. I can't explain this. It is usual to think that the sun will continue cooling in the future. But people forget that the earth must also, in the end, fall back closer and closer to the sun. Well, one very hot morning, my 4th, I think, as I was trying to get away from the heat and the strong light in a large ruin near the great house, a strange thing happened. Climbing among those piles of stones, I found a narrow room whose end and side windows were closed by falling stones. After the light outside, it seemed very dark to me. I entered it feeling my way with my hands. Suddenly I stopped and held my breath. A pair of eyes, made bright by the reflection of the daylight outside, was watching me out of the darkness. I felt the old natural fear of wild animals as I looked into those angry eyes. I was afraid to turn. Then I thought how safely people appeared to be living. And then I remembered their strange terror of the dark. Trying to control my fear, I took a step forwards and spoke. My voice was strong but shaking. I put out my hand and touched something soft. At once the eyes moved to the side and something white ran past me. I turned as my heart beat even faster and saw an odd-looking figure, its head held down in a strange way, running across the sunlit space behind me. It ran into a large stone, fell to one side, and in a moment was hidden in a black shadow under another pile of stones. It went too fast for me to see clearly, but I know it was a dull white and had strange, large, greyish-red eyes. Also, there was fair hair on its head and down its back. I can't say whether it ran on 4 legs or only with its arms held very low. After a few seconds, I followed it into the second pile of ruins. I couldn't find it at first, but after some time in the deep darkness, I saw one of those round, well-like openings that I have told you about, half closed by a large fallen stone. A sudden thought came to me. Had the thing disappeared down the well? I lit a match and, looking down, saw a small white moving creature with large bright eyes. It stared at me as it climbed down. Now I saw for the first time a kind of metal ladder down the side of the well. Then the light burned my fingers and fell out of my hand, going out as it dropped. I lit another, but the horrible little creature had disappeared. I don't know how long I sat staring down that well. Time passed before I could make myself believe that I had seen something human. But slowly I began to understand the truth, that humans hadn't stayed as one species, but had become two different animals. My pleasant children of the upper world weren't alone. And what, I wondered, was this creature of the dark doing in my idea of a perfectly organized society? What was its relationship with the calm laziness of the beautiful upper world people, and what was hidden down there? I sat on the edge of the well, telling myself that there was nothing to fear and that I must go down to find the answer. But I was very afraid to go. As I sat there, two of the upper world people came running across the daylight into the shadow. The male followed the female, throwing flowers at her as he ran. They seemed upset to find me looking down the well. I understood that it was bad behavior to look down these holes, because when I pointed to this one and tried to make a question about it in their language, they grew even more upset and turned away. But they were interested in my matches, and I struck some to amuse them. I asked them again about the well, and again I failed. So I soon left them, intending to go back to Weena and see what she could tell me. But my mind was already working. I now had an idea of the importance of these wells, of the mystery of the ghosts, of the meaning of the metal panels, and what had happened to the time machine. And I also had the beginnings of a solution to the economic mystery that had worried me. Here was my new idea. Clearly, this second human species lived underground. There were three things especially which made me think this. First, there was the white skin, common to most animals that live largely in the dark. Then there were those large eyes, like those of a cat. Finally, its confusion in the sunshine, how it ran into the stones, the strange way it held its head. All these things made me believe that its eyes weren't used to the light. Under my feet, then, there must be many tunnels where these people lived. The wells which carried air to them were all along the hillsides, everywhere, in fact, except along the river valley. Their great number showed how many tunnels there were. It seemed natural, too, to believe that the underground people made things for the comfort of the daylight people. The idea was so sensible that I accepted it at once, and then thought about how humans had turned into two species. Starting with the problems of our own age, it seemed clear to me that the widening of the social difference between the worker and the manager explained the whole situation. Even now we can see the beginnings of this. We have begun to make use of underground space. We have railways, underground workrooms and restaurants, and these are becoming more common. It was clear, I thought, that workers had begun to go underground into larger and larger factories, spending more and more of their time there, until, in the end, also, the increasing difference between the social classes made marriage between them less and less frequent. So above the ground now were the haves, looking for pleasure and comfort and beauty, and below ground the have-nots, the workers, changed by the demands of their jobs. When they were there, they had to pay rent, and not a little of it, for the air coming to their homes. If they refused, they would die. if they couldn't live in this way, they would also die. In the end, everyone living underground would be used to the conditions of their life, and as happy in their way as the upper world people were. This, I must warn you, was my explanation at the time. It may be completely wrong, but I still think it is the best one. But I think this way of life had worked better in the past. The upper world people had become too safe, and so had become smaller, weaker, and less intelligent. I didn't yet know what had happened to the underground people, but I could imagine that the changes to the Morlocks, that, I discovered later, was their name, were even greater than the changes to the Aloy, the ones I already knew. Then came worrying doubts. Why had the Morlocks taken my time machine? I felt sure they had taken it. Why, too? If the Eloi were in control, could they not get my machine back for me? And why were they so terribly afraid of the dark? As I have said, I questioned Weena about this underworld, but I learned nothing from her. At first she didn't understand my questions, and later she refused to answer them. The whole subject seemed too unpleasant. And when I asked her again, perhaps a little loudly, she began to cry. They were the only tears, except my own, that I ever saw in that golden age. When I saw those tears, I stopped worrying about the Morlocks. I lit a match, and very soon she was smiling again. Chapter 9. Underground. It may seem odd to you, but it was 2 days before I could find out more about the Morlocks. I felt a strange fear of those pale bodies. They were just the same colour as the things one sees in jars in a museum, and they were horribly cold when you touched them. I knew I could only get to the time machine by going underground, but I couldn't do it. I was so alone, and even the idea of climbing down into the darkness of the well frightened me. The next night I did not sleep well. Probably my health had suffered a little. I was confused and unhappy. Once or twice I had a feeling of great fear for which I could see no definite reason. I remember walking noiselessly into the great hall where the little people were sleeping. That night Weena was among them, and feeling more comfortable in their company. I realized that the moon was in its last quarter, and the nights were growing darker, and that there might be more appearances of those unpleasant creatures from below. And on both these days I had the restless feeling of someone who is trying to escape a duty. I felt that I could only get the time machine back if I understood these underground mysteries. But I wasn't brave enough to solve the mysteries, and I never quite felt safe. These worries drove me further and further in my walks around the country. Going southwest towards the higher country, I saw, far away, an enormous building. It was larger than the largest of the palaces or ruins I knew, and the front was pale green. The difference in appearance suggested a difference in use, and I thought about going to look around. But it was growing late, so I decided to wait until the following day, and I returned to Weena's welcome. But the next morning I realized that my interest in the Green Palace was just helping me to delay an experience I was afraid of. I decided that I would go down without wasting any more time, and walked in the early morning towards a well near the ruins. Little Weena danced beside me to the well, but when she saw me bend over the opening and look down, she seemed upset. "Goodbye, little Weena," I said, kissing her, and then I began to feel over the edge for the metal steps. At first, she watched me with surprise. Then she gave a most heartbreaking cry and, running to me, began to pull at me with her little hands. I think her fear made me braver. I shook her off, and in another moment I was inside the well. I saw her frightened face over the top and smiled to make her feel better. I had to climb down a well perhaps 200 meters deep. There were metal bars all the way down, but these were made for a person much smaller and lighter than I was, and I was quickly tired by the climb. And not simply tired. One of the bars bent suddenly under my weight and almost threw me off into the blackness below. For the moment, I hung by one hand, and after that, I didn't dare to rest again. Although my arms and back were very painful, I continued climbing down as quickly as possible. Looking up, I saw the opening, a small blue circle where Wiener's head was round and black. The noise of a machine grew louder. Everything except that little circle above was very dark, and when I looked up again, she had disappeared. I was in great discomfort and thought of going up again, but I continued to climb down. At last, with great happiness, I saw 1/2 meter to the right of me a thin opening in the wall. Pulling myself in, I found it was the start of a narrow tunnel in which I could lie down and rest. It was not too soon. I lay there, I don't know how long, until I felt a soft hand touching my face. Quickly getting to my feet in the darkness, I pulled out my matches. I struck one and saw 3 white figures moving quickly back, away from the light. Their eyes, unusually large from living in darkness, were like those of deep water fish, and reflected the light in the same way. I have no doubt they could see me, and they didn't seem to have any fear of me, only of the light. The thought of running away was still in my mind, but I told myself that the job had to be done. As I felt my way along the tunnel, the noise of machinery grew louder. Soon I came to a large open space and, striking another match, saw that I had entered an enormous underground room. It stretched into total darkness beyond my light. Great shapes like large machines rose out of the darkness and made strange shadows in which I could see the shapes of Morlocks hiding. The air wasn't very fresh, and there was a faint smell of fresh blood. Some way down the central path was a little table of white metal covered with food, so the Morlocks at least were meat-eaters. Even at the time, I remember wondering what large animals still lived to produce the red piece of meat that I saw. Then the match burned down to my fingers and fell, a moving red spot in the darkness. I have thought since then how very badly prepared I was for such an experience. When I had started building the time machine, I had had the stupid idea that the people of the future would certainly be far ahead of us in all their inventions. I had come without weapons, without medicine, without tobacco, even without enough matches. I didn't even think of bringing a camera, so I couldn't take a picture of that underworld to examine later. I stood there with only the weapons that nature had given me, hands, feet, and teeth, and the 4 matches that I had left. I was afraid to push my way in among all this machinery in the dark, and then I discovered that I had almost finished my matches. I had never thought that there was any need to save them, and I had wasted almost half the box surprising the alloy. Now I had 4 left, and while I stood in the dark, a hand touched mine. and cold fingers began feeling my face. I thought I could hear the breathing of a crowd of those horrible little creatures around me. I felt the box of matches in my hand being gently pulled away, and other hands behind me pulling at my clothes. I shouted as loudly as I could. They jumped back, and then I could feel them coming towards me again. They took hold of me more strongly, whispering odd sounds to each other. I shook violently and shouted again. This time they weren't so worried, and they made a strange laughing noise as they came back at me. I was horribly frightened. I decided to strike another match and escape under the protection of its light. I did so and, keeping the flame burning with a piece of paper from my pocket, I moved quickly into the narrow tunnel. But I had just entered this when my light was blown out, and in the blackness I could hear the Morlocks hurrying after me. In a moment I was held by several hands, trying to pull me back. I struck another light and waved it in their faces. You can't imagine how horribly inhuman they looked in their blindness and surprise, but I didn't stay. I moved back again, and when my second match went out, I struck my third. It had almost burned down when I reached the opening into the well. I lay down on the edge and felt for the metal bars. As I did so, my feet were held from behind, and I was violently pulled backwards. I lit my last match, and it went out. But I had my hand on the bars now, and, kicking violently, I got myself free of the hands of the Morlocks and quickly climbed up the well. They stayed, afraid of the light, all except one little one who followed me for some way and almost got my shoe as a prize. That climb never seemed to end. In the last 8 or 10 meters of it, a terrible feeling of sickness came over me. I had the greatest difficulty holding the bars. Several times I thought that I might fall. At last, though, I got over the top of the well and walked shakily out of the ruin into the blinding sunlight. I fell on my face. Even the earth felt sweet and clean. Then I remember Weena kissing my hands and ears, and the voices of others among the Eloi. Then, for a time, I remember nothing. Chapter 10. A Place to Live. Now I seemed in a worse position than before. Until then, except during my night of madness over the disappearance of the time machine, I had felt that in the end I would escape. But that hope was shaken by these new discoveries. I had been worried by the thought of unknown forces which I could beat when I understood them. The situation was different now. There was something sickening about the Morlocks, something inhuman. Before, I had felt like a man who had fallen into a hole. My worry was how to get out of it. Now I felt like an animal which had been caught, whose enemy would come to him soon. That enemy was the darkness of the new moon. Weena had put this fear into my head by some things she said which at first I didn't understand, about the dark nights. Now I could guess what the coming dark nights might mean. The moon was getting smaller, and each night there was a longer time of darkness. And I now understood a little of the Eloi's fear of the dark. I wondered what terrible things the Morlocks did under the new moon. The Eloi had probably been the managers and the Morlocks their servants. But that situation had changed a long time before. The two species were moving towards, or had already arrived at, a completely new relationship. The Eloi were still allowed to own the world, because the Morlocks, underground for so long, now found the daylight impossible. And the Morlocks made their clothes, I thought, and did other necessary things for them, perhaps because an old habit of service had continued. But clearly, the end of the Aloy's power was coming closer. And suddenly I thought of the meat I had seen in the underworld. I tried to remember its shape. I had a feeling it was something familiar, but I hadn't recognized it at the time. The little people could do nothing about their fear. But I was made differently. I came out of our age, this best time for humans when fear doesn't make us helpless. I at least could defend myself. Without further delay, I decided to make myself weapons and a safe place where I could sleep. From there, I could face this strange world with some of that confidence. I had been slow to realize what creatures could harm me night after night. I felt I could never sleep again until my bed was safe from them. I shook with fear to think how they had already examined me. I walked during the afternoon along the valley of the Thames, but found nowhere that seemed safe. All the buildings and trees seemed easy for such good climbers as the Morlocks to get into, judging by their skill at entering and leaving their wells. Then the Green Palace came into my mind. In the evening, carrying Weena like a child on my shoulders, I went up into the hills towards the southwest. The distance I had thought was 11 or 12 kilometers. But it was probably nearer 30. I had first seen the place on a wet afternoon, when things in the distance seemed nearer. In addition, the heel of one of my shoes was loose, so I couldn't walk well. And it was already long past sunset when I came in sight of the palace, dark against the pale yellow of the sky. Weena had been very pleased when I began to carry her, but later she wanted me to put her down. She ran along by my side, occasionally going off to pick flowers to put in my pockets. Weena had been unsure of the purpose of pockets, but had decided that they should be filled and decorated with flowers. And that reminds me, while changing my jacket, I found. The time traveller paused, put his hand into his pocket, and silently placed 2 dead flowers on the little table. Then he went back to his story. As the quiet of evening spread over the world, and we moved over the top of the hill towards Wimbledon, Weena grew tired and wanted to return to the house of grey stone. But I pointed to the Green Palace and tried to make her understand that we were looking for a safe place there. You know that quietness that comes before dark? In that calm, my senses seemed to sharpen. I thought that I could almost see the tunnels in the ground under my feet, that I could see the Morlocks going here and there and waiting for the dark. In my excitement, I imagined that they would see my arrival in their homes as an act of war. So we continued, and the evening turned into night. The ground grew difficult to see, and the trees turned black. Weena's fears and her tiredness grew. I took her in my arms and talked to her. Then, as the darkness grew deeper, she put her arms round my neck. Closing her eyes, she tightly pressed her face against my shoulder. So we went down a long hillside into a valley, and there, in the poor light, I almost fell into a little river. I walked across this and went up the opposite side. I had seen nothing of the Morlocks, but it was still early in the night. The darker hours before the moon came up hadn't yet arrived. From the top of the next hill, I saw a thick wood spreading wide and black in front of me. I stopped at this. I could see no end to it, either to the right or the left. Feeling tired, my feet especially were very painful. I carefully lowered Weena from my shoulder as I stopped and sat down on the grass. I could no longer see the Green Palace and I wasn't sure of my direction. I looked into the thickness of the wood and thought of what it might hide. In there we might be out of sight of the stars. Even if there were no other waiting danger, there would still be many things to fall over and walk into. I was very tired too after the excitement of the day, so I decided that I wouldn't face it, but would spend the night on the open hill. Weena, I was glad to find, was asleep. I put my jacket round her and sat down beside her to wait for the moon to rise. The hillside was quiet and empty, but from the black of the wood came now and then the sound of living things. Above me, the stars shone because the night was very clear, and I felt a sense of friendly comfort from their lights. All the familiar old ones had moved in the sky, rearranged in new groups during countless human lifetimes. As I looked at all these stars, I suddenly felt that my problems were smaller. I thought of their distance and their slow movements out of the unknown past into the unknown future. And in my time travelling forwards, all the activity, the traditions, the organisations, the nations, languages, literature, hopes, even the memory of humans as I knew them, had totally disappeared. Instead, there were these weak people who had forgotten their great history and the white things of which I was so afraid. Then I thought of the great fear between the two species. I thought about the meat that I had seen, and for the first time I understood what it might be. But the thought was too horrible. I looked at little Weena sleeping beside me, her face white under the stars, and put the thought from my mind. Through that long night, I kept my mind off the Morlocks as well as I could. I passed the time by trying to find signs of the old groups of stars in the sky. No doubt I slept a little. Then, as time passed, there came a soft light in the eastern sky, and the old moon came up, thin and pointed and white, and close behind and stronger came the light from the sun. No Morlocks had come near us. In fact, I had seen none on the hills that night, and in the confidence of the new day it almost seemed to me that I had been wrong to be afraid. I stood up and found my foot with the loose heel was painful, so I sat down again, took off my shoes and threw them away. I woke Weena, and we went down into the wood, now green and pleasant instead of black and unwelcoming. We found some fruit there to eat for breakfast. We soon met other Eloi, laughing and dancing in the sunlight. And then I thought again of the meat that I had seen. I felt sure now what it was, and with all my heart I pitied them. Clearly, at some time in the past, the Morlocks hadn't been able to find enough food. Possibly they had lived on rats and similar animals. Now the Eloi were like fat cows, which the Morlocks kept and hunted. And there was Weena dancing at my side. I tried to think more scientifically and less emotionally. Perhaps this was a punishment for human selfishness. Some people had been happy to live from the work of others. They had said this was necessary, and in time it had become equally necessary for the workers to eat them. But this attitude was impossible. It didn't matter how unintelligent they were, the Eloi still looked human. I understood their situation and I felt their fear. I had at that time no clear ideas about what I should do. I thought I could find a safe place and make myself some weapons out of metal or stone. Next, I hoped to find a way of making fire, so I would have the weapon of a torch. I knew that nothing would work better against these Morlocks. Then I wanted to find a way of breaking open the metal panels under the White Sphinx. I felt that if I could enter those doors and carry a light in front of me, I would discover the time machine and escape. I couldn't imagine that the Morlocks were strong enough to move it far away. I had decided to bring Weena with me to our own time. And thinking about plans like these, we walked towards the building which I had chosen as our home.